Hello, my name is Isla, and I'm 38 years old. At my sister's lavish wedding in New York, I was served only a plate of crumbs. In their eyes, I didn't deserve any more. My mother, adjusting her sapphire necklace, leaned in and whispered with a bitter smile, "This is more than enough for you." My sister, dazzling in her designer gown, walked past, glanced at my table, and muttered, "Still so pathetic." I sat completely alone. No name card, no wine, not even my name on the guest list, just this miserable plate of crumbs. I had a choice: leave quietly and, as they expected, cry in the restroom, or show them they had made a mistake. I decided to wait until the ceremony and all those hypocritical toasts about love and unity were over. When the microphone began to pass around, I stood up and said calmly, "Allow me to show you something truly special, shall we?" The lights in the hall dimmed, the screen lit up, and with a single click, I brought their world crashing down. What appeared on the screen wasn't just a video, it was a confession, proof of their betrayal, a secret they thought I would never reveal. My sister, Maya's, hands began to tremble, my mother gasped, and the groom, Gerald Thorne, froze in place. All the guests stared at the screen, and the next 3 minutes changed everything. Do you think this is just another family drama? No, this is a story about what happens behind the perfect facade when the quiet person finally decides to speak up. Stay with me, because this story isn't about revenge, it's about justice. And this is only the beginning. For the last 7 years, I've lived in complete solitude in my small, third-floor apartment in Chicago. I'm a photographer, but not the kind who shoots for glossy magazines or at extravagant high society weddings. I am a quiet observer of life. My lens seeks truth in everyday things, in the tired smiles of people returning from a night shift, in the worn-out shoes of a street dancer, in the joyful embraces of old friends at a train station. My work was modest but honest, and in a world where only appearances are valued, I learned to find dignity in the truth. I rarely speak about my family, and it's not out of anger. It's just that silence is often easier than the judgment I've grown accustomed to. That day, I was sitting in my studio, editing a portrait of an elderly couple who had been together for 45 years. Soft winter light streamed through the window, but my thoughts weren't with the warm image on the screen. I was thinking about a photograph that doesn't exist, my own family portrait. I was always the other daughter, the one who didn't have the same flawless features as my sister Maya, nor her ease with strangers. While my sister Maya posed for beauty pageants and received ovations at ballroom dance competitions, I stood on the sidelines. Sometimes I held her flowers, but more often than not, I was simply forgotten. Our mother, Jessica, often said, "Maya was born to shine. And you, Isla, my dear, were made to be in the shadows. You're important, but your role is to be unseen." Even as a child, I understood what she meant. On my 10th birthday, I sat in a small park where Jessica had told me to wait. I watched the road, full of hope, wearing a party hat, but no one ever came. I waited for over an hour until it dawned on me, Jessica had taken Maya to an agency audition on the other side of town and had simply forgotten about our little celebration. I made my way home alone on the subway, clutching an untouched cheesecake. Years later, at my high school graduation, I wore a borrowed blue dress and stood watching the graduates and their families. Parents laughed, hugged their children, and gave them bouquets. I was left alone on the sidewalk until my friend Emily's father, Mr. Gardner, offered me a ride home. Jessica and Reginald didn't come. They were at Maya's magazine photo shoot. "We were sure your graduation was tomorrow," Jessica lied, forcing a smile as if that could change their absence. I sat in my studio, looking at the unfinished photograph on my computer screen. At some point, I got up and went into the hallway. Last year's Christmas card from my family was still hanging there. On it were my mother, Jessica, and my father, Reginald, sitting by the fireplace with Maya and her fiancé, Gerald. They were all in perfectly matched light sweaters and dark jeans, holding mugs of cocoa and smiling as if it were an advertisement for the perfect family. As always, I wasn't on the card. Year after year, I was excluded from these family photos. There were never loud arguments or slamming doors in our house. The exclusion was far worse. It was neat, polite, and frighteningly deliberate. For my mother, the most important thing was the image she presented to the world. If I didn't fit into her vision of a flawless family, I was simply, gently but firmly, cut out of the frame. My father never argued. He preferred evening calls with colleagues and financial reports over conversations with his daughters. Even his rare words sounded more like they belonged in a boardroom than at home. Maya never made a scene or teased me either. She just lived as if I existed in a parallel orbit, close enough to be noticed, but too insignificant to pay attention to. The only photographs where we were together were from childhood, before she realized the center of the frame always belonged to her. That day, I opened a closet and took out a small box where I kept my personal pictures. It was my secret collection, photographs I never showed anyone. I took them out one by one, an empty mug with a lipstick stain on the rim of the sink, the armchair by the window where my father sat for hours with a newspaper, Maya's shiny bracelet forgotten on a kitchen chair after another night out. There were never faces in these photos. They weren't family portraits, but shadows of everyday life, behind which true intimacy was hidden. My way of remembering that I was there, even if I was invisible. I put the box back and glanced at the calendar. Saturday, circled in red marker, was Maya's wedding day. I was still hesitating, show up or stay home. The invitation had arrived a week ago. The thick paper envelope with gold embossing was addressed not as, to my beloved sister, not even as, Isla Campbell, but coldly and formally, Miss Isla Campbell. Inside, there was no note, no few warm words, only the invitation itself. As if an invisible voice was reminding me, you're still not part of the family, but if you don't come, it will look awkward. Now the envelope lay open on my table. The rational part of me wanted to turn away, to not participate in this spectacle. But another, quiet and stubborn part, one I had long forgotten, spoke up for the first time. Maybe it was time to step out of the shadows. Not for them. For myself. The envelope was heavy and exquisite, its weight alone hinted at status even before I opened it. I found it in my mailbox a couple of days after I had reluctantly decided I would go after all. I didn't even have to guess who it was from. The front was adorned with a gold monogram, M and J, Maya and Gerald. The swirling lines looked like an ad for expensive perfume. That was Maya all over. She was drawn to drama even in the little things, even in paper. I brought the envelope into the kitchen, placed it on my small table, and just stared at it for a few minutes before carefully slitting the edge with a letter opener. Inside lay a card, thick, expensive, printed on ivory-colored paper with gold letters that shimmered softly in the morning light. The Campbell and Thorne families invite you to the celebration of the wedding of Maya Campbell and Gerald Thorne. The ceremony was scheduled at the historic Riverstone Grand Hotel in New York, with the reception in the Empire Ballroom. The dress code was black tie, champagne only. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled deeply, not out of surprise, but with that quiet sense of resignation when everything falls into place. Of course, it would be the Riverstone. Every marble column and every gilded chandelier there spoke of money and legacy. And, of course, the groom would be Gerald. His family lived in a world of old money, with their flawless smiles and an invisible but palpable power. Maya always knew how to climb higher. She just made sure her heels never touched the ground. A few minutes later, my phone rang. The screen displayed, "Mom." Isla, her voice was flat and detached, like something from a business letter. "I hope you received the invitation." "Yes," I answered briefly. "Excellent. Then, please, try to look appropriate this time. This is a formal wedding, not some museum opening night." I let the silence hang a bit longer than necessary before saying, "You don't have to worry. I'll blend in perfectly." She didn't smile. My mother never laughed at sarcasm unless it was in her favor. Understand, Maya's wedding is an important event for our entire family. The Thorne family are not people you want to ruin relations with. But I'm not the one getting married, I said, quieter than I intended. You still represent us. So, I'm asking you, don't put anyone in an awkward position. And please, no jeans. I almost reminded her that the one time I wore jeans was after a 12-hour train ride when I was rushing to Christmas dinner. But what was the point? She wouldn't have listened anyway. A second later, the line went dead. My mother had already hung up. Later that day, while I was sorting prints for a client, my phone vibrated again. This time it was a text from Maya. In her style, light, seemingly friendly, but with a hint of a subtle command. Hey, sis. So happy you're coming. I have a tiny favor to ask. Could you maybe take a few shots at the reception? Just a couple of candid moments, nothing serious. You have such a talent, the best eye for detail. We thought since you're family, it would be extra special. And, of course, for free, haha. I stared at the phone screen. It was as if I could hear her voice, and especially the word free. As if it were a joke. As if I couldn't expect anything else. My fingers froze over the keyboard. For a second, I wanted to reply with a sharp refusal. But I knew how that would end, a call from Mom, a long tirade about how selfish I was, that, you never meet your sister halfway, and she always considers you. I had already played that conversation in my head dozens of times. So I chose a different path. I typed politely but firmly, thanks for the invitation, Maya. This time, I just want to be a guest. No reply came. The screen remained blank. That evening, the sun slowly set over the New York skyline, painting the windows in warm amber and cool steel tones. I was making tea when the phone rang again. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I slowly pressed accept. Miss Campbell, a woman's voice said. This is Helen Morgan's assistant. I'm calling on behalf of the Harbor Lights Gallery. My heart skipped a beat. We are pleased to inform you that your photo series, Echoes of Solitude, has been selected for the spring exhibition. Helen was absolutely thrilled with your work. She said you have a remarkably honest view of people. I was speechless. I had submitted that series almost a year ago, candid portraits of people in moments of silence and vulnerability. Back then, it felt like something personal, almost a secret gesture for myself, not for recognition. And now, this call that turned everything upside down. Thank you, I finally managed, feeling my voice tremble. This is incredible. An official letter will be sent to your email, the assistant added, but Miss Morgan insisted you find out personally. She believes you have a rare gift. When the call ended, I stood motionless in the middle of my apartment, pressing a hand to my chest as if trying to hold that moment inside me. Then I picked up the phone again and, almost disbelieving my own actions, dialed my mother's number. It rang 3 times before she answered. Hello, her voice was dry. Hi, Mom, I said quietly. I wanted to share some news. I've been invited to participate in the spring exhibition at Harbor Lights. Helen Morgan herself chose my work. A pause hung in the air. The kind of pause that hits harder than any words. That's nice, Isla. Listen, I'm busy with the final seating arrangements for the wedding right now. Can we talk later? And the connection was lost. I slowly lowered the phone and turned off the sound. 2 different realities lay before me, the invitation from the gallery, written with care and warmth, and the other, impersonal, mass-printed, and sent in cold silence. I knew perfectly well which one meant more. Harbor Lights was giving me a chance. A real one. But my family's wedding was just another scene in their play. The Riverstone Grand Hotel sparkled under the pale winter sky. Its facade, with high white columns and heavy gilded doors, looked as if it had been lifted from a promotional brochure. I stepped out of the rented car, and a cold wind swept across the courtyard. The fabric of my dark blue dress gently brushed against my legs as I took the first step. My dress was simple, no sequins, lace, or elaborate details. Clean lines, a calm silhouette, and the understated elegance in which I always found confidence. I adjusted the strap of my small handbag and took a deep breath before stepping through the massive revolving doors of the hotel. Inside, I was greeted by a hall that looked more like a cathedral. The space buzzed with voices, men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, women in dresses with impeccable silhouettes, their heels tapping a steady, crisp rhythm on the marble floor. The air was filled with light laughter, the exchange of polite pleasantries, and that sense of ostentatious glamour I knew all too well. I paused at the entrance, letting my eyes linger on the lavish floral arrangements lining the grand staircase. Tall branches of white orchids reached upward, like a carefully chosen symbol of purity and perfection. Maya had always loved such hints, especially when they flatteringly accentuated her image. A young woman in a prim black suit approached me. She held a tablet, and her smile looked as though it had been rehearsed dozens of times. "Miss Campbell, welcome," she said softly. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table," the girl said with a practiced smile. I nodded silently and followed her. My heels glided softly over the carpet, and each step resonated within me with a slight tension. We passed the gleaming entrance to the ballroom, and I was sure my place would be somewhere in the back rows. But my escort turned into a narrow corridor and led me further, to the very corner where the red light of an exit sign glowed. "Here you are, please," she said and stepped aside. I stopped. Before me was a small round table, set for just one person. My name was printed in neat script on a white card, Isla Campbell. It was close enough to hear the string quartet but too far to feel like part of the celebration. The other tables gleamed with candles, gold programs, and crystal glasses. Mine was empty. Completely empty. Only in the center stood a plain white plate, on which lay a piece of dry bread that had crumbled into small pieces. No butter, no drink, not even a napkin. I sat down slowly, smoothing the hem of my dress. For a second, I stared at the plate, unable to believe this was really all they had prepared for me. And when I looked up, I saw my mother watching me. My mother approached me smoothly, as if gliding over mirrored water. She wore an evening gown of dark blue velvet that softly accentuated her figure, and long emerald earrings that sparkled with every step. Her hair was gathered into a flawless high bun. Her face wore its usual smile, polite, but with no warmth in her eyes. "Darling," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet, "so good of you to come. You look comfortable." I met her gaze but didn't reply. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough so no one around could hear. "I see you've found your table. With your career and this freelance photography, I think this kind of food is quite appropriate. Simple. Modest." She nodded towards the plate with the piece of bread and crumbs, as if it were a gourmet dish. "You're used to this, aren't you?" I felt my jaw tighten, but I maintained an impassive expression. My mother stood for another moment, then turned and walked away without waiting for my response. Soon, the music changed. And in the doorway appeared Maya in her form-fitting wedding dress, delicate silk cascaded in gentle waves, the bodice adorned with beads and shimmering stones. She looked dazzling, radiating with the attention of the entire room. The crowd greeted the bride with a burst of polite applause. Maya walked through the hall with an ease as if she were gliding across a stage, capturing every gaze. Eventually, her path led her to the farthest corner, to where I sat at my small table. She tilted her head slightly, with the saccharine softness people use to express condolences. "Hello, big sister," she said, curving her lips into a perfect smile. "You came." "Yes," my reply was short. Her eyes flicked over my plate, then the chair, and then back to me. "Your dress is lovely." "True minimalism," she said and paused. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "You know, I've always admired how you manage to make things so simple and accessible. It's a talent, you could say. Even the most ordinary things seem cheaper around you." I looked directly at her, without blinking. "You never understood presentation, did you?" she continued. But I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly reached for my small handbag. Opening it, I took out a black flash drive. Not for show, not as a threat. I just placed it on my lap, my thumb lightly touching its smooth surface. Maya's smile faltered for a moment, almost imperceptibly. "Well," her voice grew tense, "enjoy the evening." I nodded, and Maya turned, walking back into the hall. Her train caught for a second on the leg of a gilded chair but quickly came free. Left alone by the exit, I looked at the plate with the dried bread and didn't touch it. My gaze was fixed on the lights of the ballroom. I was waiting, not for food or conversation, but for the moment when silence would say more than all my family's words. The coldness of that bread was still in my mind. I clutched the small black flash drive in my fingers and felt its weight, a reminder of the decision that had been brewing inside me for the past few days. And in that silence before the speeches, my thoughts returned to the night when it all started coming together. It happened 2 weeks ago, at a private party celebrating Maya and Gerald's engagement. The Thorne family hosted it on the rooftop of a luxurious building. The atmosphere was less about love and more about prestige and displaying social standing. Maya had asked me beforehand to bring my camera. "Not as a professional," she said with a slight smirk, "just take a few shots for Mom." I brought a small set of equipment. Not because I wanted to, but more out of habit. Over the years, I had learned to avoid open conflicts and maintain neutrality. That evening, I kept my distance. I didn't shoot people head-on but captured blurred reflections in glasses, silhouettes under chandeliers, Gerald circulating among the guests with impeccable courtesy. I liked being unnoticed. The camera had always been my shield, and silence my defense. When most of the guests went out to the terrace to watch the fireworks, I remained in the half-empty hall. That's when I noticed Maya. She was standing alone by the bar, illuminated by the light of her phone screen. Her face was focused, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I hid behind a column and instinctively raised my camera, not to take a picture, but to observe. She typed for a few seconds, then stopped and smiled. And in that moment, when she turned slightly, the screen came into my lens's view. I managed to catch just one line. "Today. Last time. This isn't about Gerald." The words were sharp, impulsive, and far too revealing for that place and time. Maya quickly tucked the phone into her clutch and headed for the exit. I hesitated for a second, then followed her, keeping my distance. I wasn't going to stop her or make a scene, I just needed to know what was happening. I emerged into the underground parking garage, where the air was cold and smelled of concrete and exhaust fumes. In a far corner stood her white car, a sports coupe, a graduation gift from our father. I stayed in the shadows of the underground parking lot. A few minutes later, a black Lexus pulled up next to Maya's car. A tall man in a long coat got out, Nathan Hale, one of Gerald's business contacts. Almost immediately, Maya appeared. She walked towards him confidently, without hesitation. They shared a brief hug and a kiss, calmly, like people for whom this was nothing new. At that moment, I instinctively raised my camera and started recording. No zoom, no effects, just capturing the fact. They exchanged a few words. Maya smiled, adjusting the lapel of his coat. Then they both got into her coupe and closed the doors. The parking lot fell silent again. I stopped recording and stood for another second, listening to my own breathing. Then I turned and left. I hid the file on a separate drive, deep within folders of client projects, until today, when they seated me by the exit at her wedding, as if I were an unwanted guest. On the eve of the wedding, there were a few moments I remember with particular clarity. They seemed to push me toward the decision I would later make. My mother walked past me with that same practiced smile, as if I were a mere acquaintance. My sister, all in white and basking in the glow of attention, couldn't resist a remark at my expense. And then, that table, set just for me, a simple plate with a piece of bread and crumbs. It all felt like a sign, showing me my place in their world. At that moment, I understood, this wasn't about resentment or anger. It was a feeling of clarity. All those years of being left on the sidelines had coalesced into a single conclusion. I didn't want arguments. I wanted things to be fair. A few days before the ceremony, I drove to the neighborhood where the house I once considered my own stood. A 2-story red brick mansion with white columns and heavy oak doors. A magnolia tree, which my mother had always been proud of, was already blooming by the gate. I went there with one purpose, to talk to my father. He had always been a calm man, not one to support my ideas, but not one to reject them either. I hoped that, however slim the chances, he might actually listen. Perhaps he didn't know the whole picture. Perhaps he could still be reached. I parked at the end of the driveway, grabbed my bag, phone, and camera, all I had left after preparing for the wedding, and headed to the side entrance. I knew the door code, my mother never changed it. Inside, the house greeted me with the aroma of fresh coffee and furniture polish. I paused at the threshold when I heard voices coming from the living room. I was about to call out, but then I caught my own name. My steps slowed. "Don't worry," my mother's voice sounded, calm and confident. "Everything is arranged as we discussed. Reginald knows nothing." "Are you sure?" Maya asked. "Because after the wedding, things need to move quickly. The main thing is that no one starts digging." "He won't," my mother replied. "Your father hasn't looked at the documents in years. He still thinks the lawyer is handling everything." There was the light clink of a cup against a saucer. Then, quieter but still distinct, "This is for us, for the women of our family. You've done more for the future than Isla ever could with her little exhibitions." I felt my fingers grip the strap of my bag tighter. "After the wedding, all the accounts and management will be mine," Maya said confidently. "I'll take care of you, Mom. You won't have to pretend everything is fine anymore." "Isla has always lived in her own world," my mother replied. "She thinks honesty and hard work actually matter." They both laughed. The sound was cold and self-assured. I stood motionless. My breathing became shallow, and pressure built in my temples. I took my phone out of my coat pocket, opened the recording app, and pressed the button. My hand trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the realization that everything was now changing. And then I heard Maya add, "You know, I'm not even sure about my feelings for Gerald," she said in a low voice, as if to herself. "This is what influence looks like," I heard Maya's voice. "Marriage into the Thorne family will open any boardroom door for me. You always taught me that, Mom, leave emotions at the door and seize opportunities." "Exactly," my mother replied with a hint of pride. "You've learned that better than anyone." "And Isla," Maya continued, her voice growing colder. "She was always the background. Just a presence for show. But after the wedding, I think it's time to end this charade." "I agree," my mother responded calmly. "No more forced meetings and invitations. She'll step aside, and we'll move forward." I felt a sting in my eyes. Not from their words, but from the clarity of what I had heard. This wasn't about jealousy or resentment. It was an admission, they were building a picture of the future in which there was no place for me. It wasn't just about Maya's marriage, but about inheritance, about the voices they were trying to silence. I watched the numbers on the recording screen tick by, 1 minute, 2, 3, until their conversation turned to trivialities, brunch menus, travel plans. Then I stepped back, returning to the side door. I didn't slam it, and I didn't allow myself to cry. That feeling would come later. For now, I had the most important thing, the recording. And very soon, they would have an audience. In the ballroom, the orchestra was finishing a gentle interlude. Crystal chandeliers shone over tables laid with white silk and adorned with golden menu cards. Waiters moved in sync, as if following a rehearsed choreography, filling champagne glasses and clearing empty dessert plates. A silence fell over the room, that special pause when everyone awaits the continuation of the formal part of the evening. At the main table, Gerald stood up, his father, Richard Thorne, beside him. The elder Thorne, with the voice of a politician and the composure of a banker, easily addressed the room. "To family," he said, pausing to let the clinking of glasses sound particularly distinct. "To the union of two names and two legacies. To the future of Gerald and Maya. May their union be as strong as their history." The applause was polite and warm, as if rehearsed in advance. Then the master of ceremonies returned to the microphone, shuffling a stack of cards. "And before we conclude this evening, we have one more word. A special address from the bride's sister, Isla." A light murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. Maya's smile faltered for the first time all evening. My mother, sitting 2 seats away from her, visibly tensed. I stood up. My dark blue dress, simple yet elegant, caught the soft reflection from the chandeliers. I held no glass, no speech notes. Slowly, confidently, I walked to the stage and turned to face the room. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said in a steady voice. "But tonight, I won't be giving a toast. I'm not here to offer hollow words," I said evenly. "I have something else. Something more honest. Something that has been left in the shadows for far too long." Maya sat up straight. "What is she doing?" she whispered to our mother. I held up the small black flash drive and handed it to the technician by the stage. "I'd like to show a video," I said calmly. "Please play it." The lights went out. A screen descended, and the hall, a moment ago filled with light curiosity, plunged into tense silence. I stepped aside, folding my hands in front of me. On the screen, Maya appeared, in the parking lot, illuminated by her phone. A close-up highlighted a line from her message, "Today. Last time. This isn't about Gerald." A collective gasp went through the room. The next shots were grainy footage of Maya's meeting with another man. Their intimacy was obvious. Some guests looked away, others stared, frozen. Gerald Thorne sat motionless, his knuckles white as he gripped the tablecloth. Then the audio kicked in. Our mother's voice echoed through the speakers. "Everything is arranged as we discussed. Reginald knows nothing. After the wedding, everything will be mine," Maya replied. "You can rest, Mom. I'll take care of everything." At that moment, our father, Reginald Campbell, rose from the crowd. His eyes were fixed on the screen. "Stop this." Maya cried out, her voice trembling. "It's not true." But the video continued. Her laughter mixed with Maya's, now sounding like an undeniable confession. And before the screen went black, a new voice filled the hall. "That's enough," came from the back of the room. It wasn't coming from the speakers. All eyes turned to the side entrance as Nathan Hale appeared. Dressed in a sharp dark suit, he walked confidently and calmly toward the center of the room. Maya's face turned pale. "What are you doing here?" she breathed. "I was part of her game," Nathan addressed the hall. "I was told it was over, but it turned out otherwise. I saved our conversations. I have proof." "Lies!" Maya exclaimed. "He's obsessed." For the first time, Nathan looked directly at her. "Maya, I once trusted you. But what you've done to your family, and to Gerald, it can't be hidden. He deserves to know the truth." The screen went dark, the lights came back on, and the hall was frozen in silence. Gerald Thorne sat motionless, his fingers trembling on the tablecloth. Then he slowly stood up, took the ring off his finger, and stared at it for a long time without saying a word. "I loved a beautiful illusion, not the truth," Gerald said quietly. His voice echoed through the hall like a final bell toll. He carefully placed the ring on the table and turned to his parents. Richard Thorne, who had maintained his composure all evening, now stood beside his son. His face had hardened, his gaze cold. "This union was intended not only as a personal one, but also as a business one," he said. "We believed it was founded on trust. But deception is not something our family will be associated with. From this moment, the Thornes are withdrawing from all agreements with the Campbells." Jessica Campbell tried to object, but Richard silenced her with a single glance. Those words were louder than any recording. Many guests, especially those in business circles, instantly understood what this meant. The Campbell family's reputation was collapsing not just socially, but financially. Maya sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Gerald turned and left, his mother following him, placing a hand on his shoulder. And then my mother snapped. "This is all your fault," she screamed, pointing at me. "You ruined the wedding. You destroyed what we built." But the room was no longer listening to her. Guests were standing, gathering their things, and the hum of conversations filled the space. "She deserves better," one woman whispered as she passed me. "I had no idea Maya was capable of that," a man said to his wife. "Now it makes sense why Isla kept her distance," added another voice. No one was looking at her anymore. "Sit down," her voice cracked, turning sharp. "This isn't over. Do you know who we are? We are the Campbells." But her words dissolved into the void. The music had long since stopped. The only sounds were the rustle of fabric and the creak of chairs as guests, one by one, rose and headed for the exit. I stood motionless. My hands were at my sides, my gaze not fixed on anyone in the room. And the silence in which I found myself was not about shame or defeat. It was a feeling of freedom. At the back of the hall, my father was still sitting. Reginald Campbell hadn't said a word the entire time the recordings played and the confessions were made. His tie was loosened, and his face was etched with exhaustion. When the hall was almost empty, he finally looked in my direction. Our eyes met. No words, no gestures, just the long, unreadable gaze of a man who suddenly realized that the foundation upon which he had built his family's name had cracked. I didn't say anything either. I didn't need to, everything had already been said. Inside, I knew, a new chapter had begun, and there was no going back. The ballroom was emptying rapidly. All that remained was the faint scent of flowers and candles. Waiters quietly collected glasses and untouched slices of cake. Jessica had vanished from sight, her voice had long since faded, and Maya was gone completely. I remained by the stage. My dress was slightly wrinkled, but I held myself calmly, even if inside I was still trembling from the weight of events. Suddenly, I heard a quiet, confident voice behind me, Isla Campbell. I turned around. Standing before me was a woman I hadn't seen in over a year. Margaret, tall, composed, with a silver bob and black gloves in her hands, as if she had just stepped out of a gallery. There was no socialite smile on her face, only the attentive, appraising gaze of someone who had seen more than they expected. "Margaret," I said, not hiding my surprise. "I didn't know you were here." "I wasn't invited," she replied calmly. "But some of my acquaintances were on the guest list. And rumors travel fast in the art world. Especially when an evening turns into a performance." I didn't know what to say. The last time Margaret and I had spoken, she had rejected me without mincing words. "You have technique, but no soul." I had nodded then, though her words stung. And now she stood before me in the deserted hall. "I saw everything," she said. "And it was art. Raw, honest, real. You showed the truth, and that is more powerful than any technique." I blinked, feeling my breath catch. "And now?" I asked. Margaret stepped closer. Now I want you to bring this to light. I'm prepared to curate your first exhibition. The full story, not just about the wedding, but about who you have become. I froze. I had been prepared for judgment, for reproaches, but certainly not for this. It was like a door that suddenly opened where I had expected only a wall. I glanced at my father at the end of the hall. He sat alone, his head bowed. But for me, that room no longer meant anything. I had passed through it. Now I had a new path. I looked at Margaret. When do we start? I asked. She smiled faintly. We've already begun. A week after the wedding, I moved to Chicago. The city felt like another world, tough but honest, full of sounds and light that didn't let you hide. I rented a small studio apartment in an old brick building on the outskirts. The ceilings were high, the beams exposed, and the windows were huge and slightly cracked. In the mornings, light streamed through them, painting the walls in soft gold. In the kitchen stood a second-hand coffee machine that hissed and filled the room with the smell of strong espresso. That sound became my symbol of a new beginning. I set up my cameras, backdrops, and lights. On the wall opposite the window, I hung 3 pictures: a boy with dirty cheeks, laughing somewhere in a yard, an elderly woman with her hands folded, and my own self-portrait, half hidden by a sunbeam. It was all imperfect, but that's where the truth lay. The first few weeks were hard. The phone was silent, and the few clients I had disappeared as quickly as they appeared. People recognized my name from the news, whispering. A headline circulated online: Woman exposes family secrets at wedding. Some admired my courage, others called me harsh. One podcast even dedicated an episode to me. I tried not to dwell on it. Margaret called almost every week. Let the noise die down, she would say. Then your work will speak. And one day, it did. I got a call from Modern Art Review magazine. Not for an article about the scandal, but for a series called The Unseen. The editor said, "There's an empathy in your photographs. You don't turn away." Those words were different. They weren't about sensation, but about what I wanted to do. After the publication, commissions started coming in. An elderly jazz musician asked for a portrait. A mother of 3 from the suburbs booked her first family photo shoot in a decade. I noticed that people weren't coming for glossy images. They wanted me to see them as they were. Without filters, without embellishments. One evening, I was sitting at my laptop, going through recent shots, when a message from Margaret popped up on my phone: gallery confirmed. Opening date set. Are you ready to show them the truth? I smiled and looked again at the photograph where my face was half in shadow, half in light. Then I returned to the keyboard, my fingers moved with confidence. I wasn't hiding anymore. The new chapter didn't begin with grand speeches or someone else's apologies. It entered quietly, like a sunbeam through an open window. And it felt like home. After the wedding, the Campbell name began to sound very different. What was once spoken with respect was now discussed as a cautionary tale. My mother, once the hostess of glittering parties and gala dinners, suddenly found herself without invitations. At first, they just stopped calling. The phone calls and letters vanished. Then her name was removed from the society board, with a polite letter citing recent circumstances. A newspaper wrote an article about the family's fall from grace. Old friends stopped answering her calls. Even her regular appointments at the beauty salon were cancelled. Everything she had taught us about appearances and status couldn't protect her. The recording of her words about my unimportance spread everywhere. People saw not just the act, but the attitude, and drew their own conclusions. My father also faced the consequences. Several major projects fell through, one after another. Partners cited doubts about the leadership's values and the need to protect the brand. At meetings, I heard people whisper, "Isn't that him, the father of that Isla?" Those whispers hit harder than any official statements. Worst of all for Reginald was the silence in his own home. Jessica barely spoke, withdrawn into her disappointment and bewilderment. And Maya disappeared altogether. She stopped showing up at home and in social circles. When she finally did call her father, her voice sounded unusually empty. "I need help," she said. This was not the daughter he knew. Maya had always been considered the pride of the family, the face of their ambitions, their golden girl. But her fall was swift. Gerald didn't just break off the engagement, he stopped answering her calls. His mother released an official statement: "The Thorne family has no ties to the Campbells." Brand partnerships turned their backs on Maya one by one. A jewelry company she had recently worked with terminated her contract. Talent agencies stopped responding. Even her agent, who had recently accompanied her every step, no longer returned her calls. All she had left was her apartment, her wardrobe, and memories of a former glamour. After that night, I never spoke to my parents again. The phone remained silent, and I didn't try to call first. We lived in the same city, but it was as if we were in different worlds. Maya disappeared from my life completely, and I didn't look for any trace of her. Once, I had clung to the idea that family should be there for you, even if they caused pain. Now I knew, family isn't those who share your last name, but those who see you and accept you for who you are. My life took a different path. The studio in Chicago became my new home, and my work gradually began to gain recognition. Exhibitions, articles, clients who came not for a picture-perfect image, but for the truth. It all added up to a career I had never dared to dream of before. I no longer hid behind others' expectations or tried to prove my worth to those who had never seen it. And looking back, that scandal that destroyed the Campbell family was, for me, the beginning of freedom. I lost relatives, but I found myself. I stopped being the background in someone else's story and wrote my own. The conclusion is simple: the truth is always more valuable than illusions. It may cost you old connections, but it is what opens the way forward. I chose the truth. And it was the truth that made me stronger.